Hi everyone, welcome to AZ-303 study notes number 5. Today we are taking a look at Azure Service Endpoints and Azure Private Link. Let's dive right into the notes and into the portal and see what we can learn. Alrighty, so what are service endpoints? They are a type of configuration that allow us to integrate different services with our VNets. And we are basically providing the private IP address information to whatever servers we're connecting it through the Microsoft backbone. I have this diagram here, and you can see we have a VNet 1 over here and a subnet, and then we have a virtual machine inside of that subnet. If we establish a service endpoint that's connecting to a storage account, that means that the storage account will have access and connectivity to that subnet via the Microsoft backbone, thanks to the service endpoint. So why would you want to use a service endpoint? Well, obviously, since the traffic between your connected services and your VNet traverses through the Microsoft backbone, it's low latency and it is secure. Also, many Azure services are built for public accessibility. So when you place a firewall in front of the service that you want to connect and utilize with a service endpoint, you can remove that public accessibility. So I have that in this diagram here. It's the same configuration, but we have a firewall right in front of the storage account, and that can basically deny all traffic except for the traffic that comes through that service endpoint. So let's actually hop into the portal, and we can use the Cloud Shell CLI to create a service endpoint. Now, not all services, not all Azure services support service endpoints, but we can use this command here that I've already got in my notes to help us figure out what services are available. The command just asks to list endpoint services for whatever location you're in. Depending on your region, you may or may not have the same as what I have. We're going to use Microsoft storage for our example. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. There we go. Let's clear the screen now. And you have to keep in mind that like this diagram shows the service endpoint is configured on the subnet level. So we'll have to use the CLI command with a subnet. So I've already copied in my values, but all you have to do is AZ network VNet subnet update. Like I mentioned, since it's on the subnet level, you're performing a configuration change to your subnet. And then the name of your subnet, the name of your VNet, the name of the resource group, and the service endpoint you want to utilize. Since from that list, we saw that Microsoft storage is available, we're going to go ahead and use Microsoft storage. I'm going to copy that in here. All right, so it looks like that created. Let's hop into the VNet 1 and click on connected devices, and then let's select the device in there. We can see what gets created if we go to effective routes, and we should see a couple of new routes in here once it loads. Yes. So you see now virtual network service endpoint over here, these two records that are now inserted. That's what's been created. Now let's talk a little bit about how we would say remove public accessibility from a service utilizing service endpoint. Let's select a storage account here. Let's work with this one. If we go into the firewalls and virtual networks option, and then we select selected networks here, in order for us to say remove all public accessibility and enable just access from the service endpoint, we would have to add an existing virtual network that has the service endpoint applied to it. So in this case, it would be VNet 1, and then it would ask which subnet is that endpoint in, and it's in the default subnet, because that's what we created it with the CLI command. But I'm not going to change that, so let's hit OK. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about private link. Now, service endpoints and private link are very similar. They both enable secure connectivity from your VNet to other services, but private link provides some additional features. Private link actually provides a private IP address to access the supported services by. And it can also be used for services that are customer owned or on premise, or owned by a partner. And it can also provide cross-region connectivity. And you can also provide more of a granular protection to what specific services you are enabling this connectivity to. And you don't have to deploy it to a dedicated subnet. So those are some additional features you get when you use private link over service endpoint. All right, so let's take a look at what the architecture looks like. Inside of private link, we have private endpoints, connected resources, and private link service. So the private endpoint is the actual network interface that connects to the support service. And this network interface is what receives a private IP address from the registered subnet. And it is also configured with DNS, right? The connected resources are just the Azure platform as a service resources that are associated with the private link. And a private link service is actually when you configure private link for a customer-owned solution or partner-owned solution. And as long as there's a standard load balancer inside of that solution, you'd be able to use private link. So let's open up a photo that I have with a diagram that explains this a little bit. You see inside of our VNet 2 that's located in the UK South, there's a private endpoint right here, and that has a private IP address. You see there's a VM in here that's pointing to that endpoint. And this endpoint has connectivity to a customer-owned solution, which, like we mentioned, is called the private link service. And this is in a different VNet in a different region as well. But other things that we can enable is through a VPN, like we saw in the previous video, we can establish connectivity with our on-prem infrastructure. And our on-prem infrastructure would also be able to access the private endpoint and the service that it is connected to. Also, through VNet peering, which we saw as well in the previous episode, we can allow that peered VNet to have access, so the resources inside that VNet to have access to that private endpoint, which would allow access to the solution that the private endpoint is connected to. You can see VNet 1 is in US East 2, VNet 2 is in UK South, and it's cross-region, and also could be a different subscription. You might be thinking, wow, this kind of enables endless possibilities in terms of architecture. Yeah, it does. Also, the fact that you can use something like private link service and have solutions that are made by, say, a partner or by someone else outside of your team, and they can just plug into your solution via a private endpoint. Really, endless possibilities. Anyway, let's actually create a private link. So let's click into search bar and select private link. And let's click into private endpoints and click add. And let's create I think I have a resource group already. Yes. And we'll just call this private link storage. Private link storage. Cool. US East 2. Yes. Next, we have to configure the resource that we are connecting this private endpoint to. And for me, that's going to be storage account. And then we can just select any storage account here. And you can see that it asks you to select the target sub-resource. So remember, private link enables us to be more granular with what we get access to. So in here, I'm just going to select blob. Then I'll hit next to set up the configuration. It's asking us what virtual network we want to select. VNet 1 is fine. And which subnet? The default subnet is fine. And you can also see that you also get DNS configured. So that's great. Let's hit review and create. Here we are in the private link dash storage that we just created. Inside of the overview option, we can see that there's a DNS setting that has been provided for us. And now you can use this FQDN in order to connect to your blob storage. And you also have a private IP address in there. And if we take a look at, say, VNet, the VNet that we created this in, and you can also see that inside of connected devices, the network interface that was created with the private endpoint is now in here. All right, everyone, that is it for today. As always, my notes will be in the description if you'd like to reference them. If you want to talk cloud, hit me up on Twitter at MadeByGPS. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.